All these stories contained in this collection reflect an important time in literature, in which the strange, so-called, primarily focused on the inner life of human beings, the psychological, and the supernatural is dramatically muted. People are now afraid of the unknown within, and the outside possibilities are lessened. So these works explore the inside from the perspective in time, and reading one of the classics of what many people would call horror, or psychological horror to be more precise, after so many years that I've read it, gave me a new perspective. So if you want to know about these stories and some of my thoughts on it, stay tuned. Welcome to biblioCultist, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, philosophy, history, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. Doing these things is really important for the growth of the channel, and I appreciate it. I will also put my socials below and on the side where you can follow me in a single fashion or in recurring fashion. And I really appreciate those things too. In this episode, I'm going over the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and Other Stories by Robert Louis Stevenson. This edition is by Word Cloud Classics 2014. And I will put in the pinned comment my Amazon associate link where you can find it if you want to get it in any format. It doesn't have to be the exact one I'm reviewing here. And when you use that link, the channel gets a small percentage of the sale, and I really appreciate it. I will put this exact collection because there's always going to be a lot of different versions in which you have Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and a variety of other stories. But I think this particular combination is interesting. And I will go through a small description of each, and I always do spoiler-free reviews, but I will give you some philosophical and ideological perspectives on the book to entice you to get it, basically. The first story is Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, and it contends with the notion of allowing the inner self to fully manifest and what that truly means. So it seems to express the common anxiety that the inner self, the animal nature, is uncontrollable and somewhat disturbed. I believe it has a similar concern with the one presented in the picture of Dorian Gray. And I did a review of that. If you want to find it, just go to my playlist section, click fiction, and you'll see it there quite easily. The physical manifestation of internal horror, of moral decay, how people perceive you when you behave in a certain way, and how you're supposed to behave in civilized society in contrast with your desires and passions, etc. I'll quote a quick section of the story, which I think is relevant here. Hence it came about that I concealed my pleasures, and that when I reached years of reflection and began to look around me and take stock of my progress and position in the world, I stood already committed to a profound duplicity of life. Many a man would have even blazoned such irregularities as I was guilty of, but from the high views that I had set before me, I regarded and hid them with an almost morbid sense of shame. It was thus rather the exacting nature of my aspirations than any particular degradation in my faults that made me what I was, and, with even a deeper trench than in the majority of men, severed in me those provinces of good and ill which divide and compound man's dual nature. As you can see, there is this presupposition that human beings are split in two. One nature is the animal beast nature, and the other one is the civilized, moral, thinking nature. One is emotional, the other one is analytical. Very similar to the dualism you find in most religions when it comes to the struggle between the spirit and the struggle for existence, etc. And although you do have other philosophers that posit the notion that there's really no real separation between these two, it's just a matter of balancing desire with ethical behavior. Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde explores the very notion of these things, and I think for that reason it's a very important work. And it's a classic. Everyone either knows about it or at least has some superficial understanding of the basic premise of the work. The next story in the collection is The Suicide Club. Now, the following 3 stories in this collection belong to a book that Stevenson published as The New Arabian Nights. And I love the Arabian Nights. I think it's an awesome collection. It's a classic. And Stevenson was trying to create a new version of this, like his own interpretation of this core idea of the Arabian Nights. So he began that with The Suicide Club. And as I go through these stories, I'll try to connect them so you see what's the point of why he put them together in this collection. But The Suicide Club again delves into the inner temptations of the main character and the absurdly dangerous consequences of tempting fate. What is true despair? What is boredom? And what are the consequences of boredom? There's also a fear of modernity, which is interesting there, and the whole conceptual basis of the story, convenience, and how convenience can be a dark force, a perverse manifestation of reality, is all very interesting. Also, the author's reflection on death through the story is fascinating because it makes a novel argument for distancing the soul from every aspect of the body. I don't want to spoil it, but there's a section in the story in which there's a point to be made about the difference between a dead body and a real human being. So because at the time the mood was scientific, the particular focus on the difference between an organic being who doesn't have a soul within it as just a lump of matter was not as common as people think. Even common people today, when you ask them about the burial or if they're going to be cremated, they usually go with the attitude of, I don't really care once I'm dead. What's left doesn't matter. You could throw it in the trash for all I care, that kind of attitude. But this attitude was never common. It's quite a modern phenomenon. And it stems from this kind of hyper biological scientific attitude towards the body. It doesn't mean that most people don't think there's a soul, but they just think the body is a vessel. And that's a lot more common over in the Vedic kind of Indian milieu. The body is cremated, treated that way, but the Christian civilization saw it completely different. The body was crucial for the soul because the soul cannot even be fully developed and cannot be properly situated unless it's situated in his own body. So the soul-body connection is so crucial that you have the resurrection of the body, etc. So the idea that you could just throw a body away and has no personality left even after death is quite new, to the point in which most horror concepts and stories are based on the notion that the body comes back. And then there's the fear of where's the soul right now, because this was a theological concern. If the body lives from the grave, but the soul is not in it, then what do you have? And the return of the soul to the body, that's another concern. And this whole thing became a huge, important debate. But now at this time, you have this kind of dismissive attitude towards the body. I think that's very cool to see, in effect, kind of happening as you read. You're seeing the first indicators of this, but through novels. It was happening before, but now you're starting to see it in popular culture is the point. The next story in this new Arabian Nights sequence, it's called The Rajah's Diamond. It's an independent story, but it connects with the prior story because it has Prince Florizel, which kind of drives the story, but at the same time, it's not really a main component of the story, which is very similar to Arabian Nights anyway. In this particular story, he divides each character into its own tiny little story, which makes it very cool to read. Very common these days, but it seems to be quite experimental at the time, but I could be wrong. I don't think I've read sufficient of the contemporary literature around Stevenson to be able to make that statement, but I've read sufficiently to get a feel that Stevenson is being very creative here. My favorite section in this particular story would be the one that deals with a young priest or theologian, because the topic that the theologian is studying is social obligations, ethics. And of course, as you read the story, the fact that this character is studying this and he's such an expert on it, and then what happens in the story makes it funny and clearly an indication that Stevenson was somewhat of a cynic when it came to theology, or at least cynical towards the priesthood, because you can see the dynamic happening there, and you'll see when you read it. Now, the last one in that interconnected series is called The Pavilion on the Links, which some academics consider to be the prototype of the modern thriller. Now, this story is fully isolated from the other two when it comes to the characters, although it's happening in the same time frame, but it is also isolated from the rest of society by placing it in an eccentric natural setting. And the characters are somewhat eccentric too, including a very kind of hippie-like almost individual who goes into the woods and just lives in a savage way and seems to be this kind of free spirit type that you start to see in literature further on in time into the 20th century, actually. It's not much of a morality tale, but it does explore friendship in a very curious way. And although it's not my favorite, it does have a lot of interesting stuff. Now, the last one was taken from a completely different collection, but I think it's a great story. It's called A Lodging for the Night. And this one is actually set way back in time from the usual setting of the other stories. And I find it to be a cozy tale, though it's very dark. It starts in a very aggressive, kind of unexpected fashion. And it takes the main character through a particular historical time. So it is considered to be a historical novel. But as you read it, it feels more like a Poe or even a Lovecraftian kind of story. But at the end of it all, in my opinion, it is really a morality and social tale, because it contends with class distinction and the notion that ethics are contingent upon circumstantial reality, that a person who is very poor and suffers a lot will have a different conception of ethics than someone who's very comfortable and educated, etc. And again, this doesn't seem to be very fascinating these days, because this is something that has been explored so much in modern times, because modernity is obsessed with the notion of equalizing everyone, of evening the scales. So obviously, this kind of egalitarian mood is quite common. But in the time of Stevenson, it really wasn't. And therefore, what he's exploring is shocking. And the way he's exploring it would be shocking. And it still has some of its effect today, especially the last scene, which is really the main scene, and the interaction of these two characters who come from different backgrounds, and they're kind of interact and judging each other, etc. So I would call it even an exploration of pragmatic ethics. Just that by itself is quite fascinating. So all in all, great little collection here. It does have a classic, but I do think that the other stories are very important, because they all seem to be in the same particular mood of exploring the internal horrors, the possible conflicts between the public self and a private self, desires versus proper behavior, etc. So these are all universal topics. And I think almost every human being, no matter the time and space, the time, location in which we find ourselves, we can derive some benefit from it. So go to the link, check out the version that I have there. And if you want to say something about Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, how it has impacted you, if you have a different perspective on it, put it in the comments. I'll read everything that is placed in the comments, and I appreciate them. So hopefully you enjoy the review. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, comment on the video, and click the bell if you want to get notified when I put out a new video. So thank you for being with me. See you next time.